Hello and welcome to 310 to Left, another edition of the podcast. The band back together. We've kind of had a bunch of individual shows and hosts and all of that. But, the dog days of August do that to a team. And now we are ready for the stretch run. I'm Tom Karen from Nesson. And joining me, as always, my partner, my friend, and the road warrior who is back home now, Alex Speier, the Boston Globe. Alex, how are you?
Just trying to get the roster back to full strength, Tom, for the stretch run. How are you?
Every team has to deal with players missing, right? It's just you've got to be playing your best at the right time, and I'm running out of corny analogies, so we'll just get to it. A really good road trip. You got to see a team that I love. I love the zombie Red Sox, as you have dubbed them. They keep coming back from the dead, and they can prove to be lethal, and it continues to be a fun team to watch.
A surprising team to watch because I think that there have been so many different junctures of this season when we've said that all signs point to, okay, this has been an impressive run where they've surpassed any reasonable expectations, but they've hit the wall or something is going awry and it's clearly going to derail them, whether it's a succession of injuries or whether it's like the bullpen meltdowns following the All-Star break, whatever. There keep being all of these indications of like, okay, they're teetering on the verge of collapse. And then they come back from it and play really well against good teams, no less, right? Like the fact that they went into Houston and won 2 out of 3 games there in order to close out a winning road trip against 2 teams that are almost surely going to be in the postseason. They're stubborn and they're tough and they really do a good job of compartmentalizing their bad stretches of baseball and kind of getting themselves back on the right track. That's not a guarantee that they're going to make the playoffs, but what it has guaranteed is that they've made games, at least in late August, more interesting than I think a lot of people expected.
No doubt, right? Because a couple of those losses, they easily could have been 6-1 on the road trip, but a couple of those losses were gut punch type losses. And this time of year, you're watching a young team with little to no playoff experience, and you're wondering how they're going to respond to that. But to your point, they keep responding. They keep finding a way. And though they are flawed, aren't we all? They do somehow, the offense has overcome the pitching in the second half. The bullpen, which looked like it was about to completely collapse, goes 8 1/3 scoreless over the last 2 games, both wins over Houston. I said fun because it is fun. It's a roller coaster, and it hasn't let down yet.
Yeah, I think it is surprises are the best part of sports, right? Like it's not fun to pay attention to something where you know the script and you know what the denouement is going to look like. So from that vantage point, I think that this is one of the most surprising teams that I've covered, certainly dating back to, I would say 2013 is probably in a category all of its own. So is 2012 and 2011 in different ways, but this has been a very unexpected season. Like I had a conversation with Ron Renicky of the Dodgers, formerly the Red Sox manager, back when the Red Sox were playing the Dodgers right after the All-Star break. And we were just discussing what the Red Sox have done. And he said, I look at our lineup and I kind of know why we're doing what we're doing. And then I look at the Red Sox lineup and I'm not really sure that I know exactly how what is happening there is happening. And yet, like, there they are. Like they're playing, they are surprising. They're surprising the league. And now they have different components to what they're doing. Tristan Casas is obviously back. We're seeing Jaron Duran kind of catching fire over the course of this road trip. Wilyer Abreu has been stabilizing. Masataka Yoshida having one of the hottest stretches that we've seen for any member of the Red Sox in the 21st century over a 7-game run. So there are surprising elements to this for sure.
You're swinging for the fences. You talk about 2013 and championship teams of the past. I'll just go back to 2021, right? I mean, that road, right? We gave them no chance at the end of August. And you remember they had 12 COVID diagnosis in 11 days, or they had players scattered across the East Coast in hotel rooms because they could, going out. I always remember going out in the middle of a game and taking Xander Bogaerts off the field at Tropicana Field. And that team made the playoffs in the final game. And what an October it was. It's so easy to remember that, to forget that that was just 3 years ago, and they were 2 wins away from the World Series. And if not for a blown called strike three with Evaldi on the mound, they might have gone to the World Series. I'm over that. I'm okay. But the point is, this team reminds me of that, a team that just kind of kept going one day at a time and wound up making for a hell of a fun fall of baseball.
The difference between that team and this team is that they had a couple more established superstars that were part of that run, right? So like when you had Xander plus Rafi Devers having an amazing year, plus JD Martinez, plus Schwarber, yeah, and for that matter, Sale was back, right? And that was a year where Evaldi was a Cy Young candidate. So although established from 18 maybe, but there was more star power on that team, more established star power on this team. That's why I refer to this one as being a little bit more surprising. But they also haven't made the playoffs yet, so there's that. But the point that you make is an excellent one, which defies your suggesting that everyone is flawed. Tom, you're not. Which is to say that get in. And our guest today on 310 to Left is a great person to talk about that with, because the Arizona Diamondbacks have become the patron saints of the idea of just get in. With last year, the Diamondbacks were the number 6 seed in the NL. They looked like they were going to find their way collapsing out of the postseason picture. Ended up kind of sneaking in at the end when the Cubs fell apart, and then ended up making a run to the World Series that had everyone at the GM meetings, every general manager saying, "Just get in."
So you managed to get the perfect guy to talk about it. Mike Hazen, the general manager of the Diamondbacks. A terrific pickup. I was out of pocket. I was unavailable. You were on your own, Alex, and you again, swinging for the fences. You got a home run with Mike Hazen.
Yeah, my own transactional movements amongst Major League Baseball executives. But Mike is a fantastic guest for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that he has the perspective not only of being the Diamondbacks general manager, but he was also a Red Sox top executive from 2006 when he was hired as the farm director through the 2016 season. He was a farm director, a VP of baseball operations. He was an assistant GM, finally a general manager under Dave Dbacks in 2016. Played a big role in building a homegrown powerhouse with the Red Sox, something that he's now been taking to the desert. And and he's doing it. So they're an interesting team to be playing this weekend.
They certainly are. Let's get right to it if it's time. I think it is. Alex Speier caught up with Diamondbacks general manager Mike Hazen right before they arrived in Boston for the weekend series. Hazen, the guest on this edition of the 310 to Left podcast.
Mike Hazen, ever since last fall, there was plenty of speculation that the Hazens would end up finding the allure of a return to New England to be irresistible, that you guys would end up back here. So can we break news? Are the Hazens indeed going to be relocating to New England?
There's one that will be relocating to New England. Yes, I will not be, and the three others will. The three others will not. So we got one relocating to New England, but his long-awaited return to. Instead of being in Westwood, he'll be in Medford. So we'll see how that goes. But we're coming this week. The Sox play the Dbacks and drop them off at school.
Yeah, this was very clever of you. Like this is one of the most intelligent, like cost-efficient moves of a child cross country into his college dorm that I've ever heard of. Right? Like are you doing the team plane for all of his belongings?
Right? No, not doing that. We're flying commercial. Like I know you don't, but some of us have to still fly commercial. and yeah, this is just our slow, long game way of worming ourselves back into the Boston area.
Well, okay, so let's pick up on that. Like obviously last year, the Red Sox had a job opening atop baseball operations, and your name was naturally there was widespread speculation about whether or not they would be chasing after you because of the strong relationships that you have with members of the Red Sox organization, the fact that you are from the area. But at the same time, you are and were the Diamondbacks general manager. Was there ever any temptation, given your roots up here, to kind of play it out and see what could there be a conversation before you ended up signing back with the Dbacks, signing an extension with the Dbacks before the end of last season?
Yeah, I look, we have a lot of unfinished business here. We've put our roots down here. We love all the time we had in Boston working for the Red Sox was certainly growing up a dream come true. From the Jim Rice, Dwight Evans Red Sox that I grew up with to being there from '06 to 16. And but being out here is where we're at and what we're motivated and where we're going to be. And we're trying to win a World Series here for the first time since 2001. And that's what our job is. And we love being here. We've put our roots down, like I said, and so my kids are here and they're Dbacks fans and Corbin Carroll fans. And so that's a very strong pull.
Yeah, you must have. They must have been thrilled when it must have been a nice feeling to be able to get them Corbin Carroll jerseys, knowing that they would be able to wear them for a while.
Yes, that's part of our long-term goal was to have some of our guys be able to have jerseys here for a long time. And I look back on trading Goldie, which wasn't it's not the highlight of my career necessarily, and that was we did it sort of with a heavy heart and in a lot of ways, but we were going through a pretty big transition in the organization. And I know that was one of the things that sort of stung fans here, trying to build that name recognition around our team. And now we have this young group of players that we have on our team that hopefully that's going to be part of what we're doing moving forward, what we're going to be doing. And hopefully we can have a group around Corbin that the fans of this area are going to get to know and grow up with and watch really good baseball.
So it's super interesting for me to think about like how that group has come together. And obviously you mentioned Corbin Carroll, like a potential superstar. My 10-year-old son is already curious whether or not he's going to be a Hall of Famer. Conversation with you for another day. But it is interesting to think about the draft class that he came in with, right? 2019, when Corbin Carroll was your first round pick. You guys had 7 picks that year between the first and second rounds. So like massive opportunity to change the future direction of the Diamondbacks. And it made me think, based on your prior experience when you were Red Sox, in every position imaginable, from farm director, starting in the fall of 2005, straight through when you were GM in 2016. You obviously had the experience of some draft picks, some draft classes with the Red Sox where you had an opportunity to do damage, right? Like you had the 2011 draft class, which had 4 first-round picks, ended up being the draft class that produced Jackie Bradley Jr. and Matt Barnes, a guy named Mookie Betts in the 5th round that year. How much did that experience of the possibility of having a major number of high-round picks inform how you guys approached 2019 when you had all of those top picks that ended up including Carroll?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we did in what we try to do was we knew the foundation for the future impact of a good major league team was going to have to come from this draft. And we've taken a lot of college players over the years and a lot of good ones. But I think we were a little more aggressive going after some high school guys and in that year and in subsequent years. And we've hit on some of that upside, and some of that upside's turned into a lot of impact players. And and where we are in the food chain from a market standpoint, getting superstar players isn't as easy. The vehicle through free agency is probably a little tougher for us. Not that we can't play, and we have been, but it's a little tougher. And we need to find that impact a lot of ways in trades and in the draft. And I think when I look back on the group of players, not just with the Red Sox, but also with us from the 19, 20, 21 draft, was that group of those top picks became the foundation of the team that we had last year, where we had a bunch of 23 and 24-year-olds in our lineup during the playoffs and ultimately into the World Series. And that's something that when we were doing that, it didn't all come from the 19 draft, obviously, but we were trying to aggregate a young core of players. I think something that we saw more with the maybe the '07 class in Boston and beyond World Series team, and how strong those teams were moving forward and how together they were, and they built relationships together. We wanted to try to recreate that.
How do you do that? How do you how do you let culture be is it tricky to think that the culture can be built from the youth up? Or, did you to what degree were you like, okay, I have to supplement with the right, with the right elements of veteran leadership? And to what degree did you want to avoid kind of surrounding with too much veteran leadership so that young players like Corbin Carroll could be leaders of the group that they came up with?
Yeah, it's a fine line. I don't know the exact answer to that. I do think having a young group together that comes up through the minor leagues, that play together through the minor leagues, I think there's a natural bond when those players get to the big leagues together. We did see it in Boston. We've seen it here. They're close. They're friends on and off the field. I think they root for each other even when they're competing with each other, I think that's one of the trickier dynamics, is that sometimes guys play the same position and they're competing for playing time and they're competing, somebody might get optioned, but they're friends and they root for each other. And I think that goes a long way in 162 games. But one of the things we saw through the middle of last year was that need. We had a good group of young players. They played hard. They played fast. We were pretty dynamic. I do think we were missing a little bit of that veteran presence. Like when Longo was here, we got Tommy Pham, we brought in Paul Sewell. Like those guys that we brought in from the outside, I do think helped bring that group together in a lot of ways, because sometimes we lost for 2 or 3 years pretty aggressively here, and I think unwinding the losing is hard for young players. I think you get indoctrinated into the losing cycles, and this is what our fate's going to be, and we had to change that a little bit. And I think some of that comes with players progressing, and you win a few games, the chicken or the egg thing. But I think also some of it's bringing in some veterans that have won, and you lose a couple of games in a row, everyone's just like, all right, it's all right. We've lost a couple of games in a row. Who cares? It has no bearing on what we're going to do today. And I think those are some of the important things that we brought in that really helped put together that group of young players into a winning environment.
So, the 5-year timetable is also kind of interesting, right? Because if you think about the 2011 draft that you had with the Red Sox, it was really in 2015, late 2015, that those guys started showing a great deal of promise. 2016, they ended up kind of in the first, when your last season in Boston, probably all credit to you. They ended up starting their kind of open window of championship contention that resulted in that championship by 2018. 2019, you have that group that you identified as the basis of a core. 2023, only 4 years, they end up kind of taking that next step with a lot of the guys who they're surrounded by. Is that a reasonable timetable? When you think of kind of core formation, can it go from, can it be constructed in 4 or 5 years to open a championship window? Is that reliable?
I think it's sooner than that now, honestly. I do. I think we went to the World Series last year in 23. Some of our guys were in the 2021 draft. I think some guys are getting to the big leagues quicker now. Younger players are playing all the time. I feel like 5 years was kind of what it was like when we would go level to level to level. When I first started as a farm director, it's kind of what you did. A guy went level to level to level. You basically played at 4 levels for 4 years, unless you were, like PD or one of those guys that just kind of blew through the system. Ellsbury blew through the system. I think, but by and large, guys just went, and I don't think that's happening as much anymore, especially pitchers. Pitchers are going through pretty quickly, getting to the big leagues with their stuff and being able to pitch. So I think it's probably a rough framework, but I think guys are getting there quicker. I think how you supplement that at the major league, the decisions we're making with trades or with outside free agent signings, that's what ties it all together. If you don't do a good job at that, it's not going to work. If you do a good job at that, I think it can all come together. Because I think some of the veteran players feed off the youth and the energy through a 162 game season of the young guys too. I think that's where it all kind of comes together.
It's super interesting that you mentioned the trade component in terms of supplementing, right? Because again, 2019, right? I deal with round numbers very well, so please excuse my my basic line of thinking. But that was also the summer that you traded Jazz Chisholm for Zach Gallen, right? That was a decision that felt like it was made based on a strength that you had in the system to address a weakness. And you've also, that's not the only time that you've done that you've traded, these haven't been necessarily traditional short-term for long-term trades, right? Like you got to the Diamondbacks, you immediately traded Mitch Haniger and Gene Segura to the Mariners for Marte and for Taijuan Walker. You also had the Dalton Varsho trade for Gurriel as well as Gabriel Moreno. That to me is particularly interesting in the context of the Red Sox, right? The Red Sox have like this clear area of strength in terms of where their prospects are. They have a bunch of left-handed up the middle players who look like they have a chance to be pretty good, and they only have so many spots in the big league level where they can play them. How important is it to use surplus areas in a strong farm system and to be kind of like either creative or aggressive in terms of addressing long-term areas of weakness for an organization?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. Like, I think some of it, the financial dynamics around payroll and ability to maneuver in the free agent market dictates a lot of, I think, somewhat how you have to operate. I think what you have access to, in terms of like starting pitchers. So getting Zach Gallen, we didn't feel like we had a lot of long-term starting pitching at the time, and there's not a lot of great ways to get it. And to be fair, in starting pitching, I don't care where you are really it's the most expensive commodity. Like starting pitching in general, like those finding young starting pitchers is really difficult in this league because the hitters now, anyone 1 through 9 can take you out of the ballpark. So I think pitching is becoming that much more difficult, especially starters, guys that you want to be able to haul innings, to go through lineups 3 times. Like that's just still something that we struggled with to really figure out where we can go get that. In the draft, it's tough. They come from all over the place. The more of the best hitters are aggregated at the very top of the draft, whereas the pitching, if you go look at where all the starting pitching in baseball come from, it's all over. It's all over the draft. And so I think the challenge there is just taking, with the Moreno trade, like we didn't have a catcher and we were struggling to figure out ways to kind of have a long-term catcher here. We'd been here for 7 years and we'd struggled to kind of figure out where that position we were going to fill it. So we took some risks, not every one of these risks has worked out. The ones you've highlighted have, thank you. We have also taken some other risks that have not, and I appreciate you not bringing those up. But
that'll be a separate podcast.
The Mike Hazen failings.
That's on Baseball Isn't Boring, yeah.
Right. Oh wow, that would run a little longer than this one will. This episode will, unfortunately. I think we're in a position where we are as an organization that we can't just sit still, that we got to take risks, and we try to take calculated risks, but you still have to take risks. And I think some of those risks are trading good players. One of the challenges of making trades is if you're not going to give anything up, you shouldn't really be expecting. Nobody rips anybody off. It's everybody's smart, and so my lights just went out. Hold on. You have to take your opportunities where you can. And unfortunately, if you're going to push a deal across in a lot of cases, you have to be able to give up value too. And it's painful sometimes because there's a lot of players that you mentioned that I traded that I wish I hadn't traded when I look across, right? But unfortunately, I feel like that's where you have to take those risks sometimes.
I guess you raise interesting points about the kind of like you're invested in some of these prospects that you're trading away, right? Like that you're trading away as long-term for long-term deals. Is that structure of a deal more or less difficult than the kind of traditional long-term asset for short-term for shorter-term upgrade?
I don't know. They're both tricky because when you're dealing with the short term, you're talking about maximizing performance in a very small window. And in this sport, like that's a tough thing to put your finger on, right? You trade for guys that are expiring contracts at the deadline. You have 2 months. You're trying to project the race, right? Like what are we going to get? How many appearances does the reliever have, or at bats does a position player have, and what are you going to get from a production standpoint? You know what you're giving up in most cases, even if they're young and they're an A-ball or AA, they're getting 7 to 8 years of having these guys potentially, and so you know what you're giving up. The other one The other one, I don't know. I sometimes it's tricky because a lot of times I think we've been more attached to those players in a lot of ways, like especially the guys that have already played on our major league team that have sort of started to cement themselves into maybe like a young leadership role on the team in the major league clubhouse. Their teammates that are around that, I think it's just a different dynamic when you're taking those guys off the club. But again, like in some ways, everybody's shooting for those young major leaguers now in a lot of trades. And in some ways, to get a deal done, you have to agree to do that. And in other ways, that becomes nearly impossible if you're contending or you're winning because you have to weigh the in and the out, right? Like trading Dalton Varsho was very tough for us because we were losing Gold Glove defense in the outfield, and we were built on pitching and defense in a lot of ways. And obviously, he hit 25 to 30 home runs for us. It just became more of how are we getting that other position, and we didn't really have a choice in a lot of ways. Like there was no other avenue for us to get those players. You were going to have to pay up that way. And again, like from the Gallen standpoint, getting Zach Gallen was going to cost you. If I got multiple phone calls as soon as I hung up the phone with the Marlins asking to flip Zach Gallen, like they had other places where they were going to take this. And if you said no, I don't think we get him. If we didn't give up Jazz, I don't think we're getting him. So that's the risk you run. You can say no to all the trades, but you're going to watch him go somewhere else. And so I just think it's hard, but you have to be willing to part with quality players to get quality players.
On the subject of the difficulty of consummating trades, I feel like you earn credit for having complicated the entire trade industry, the entire nature of the industry when it comes to trades. Because like ever since you showed up at the GM meetings last year, everyone was citing the 2023 Arizona Diamondbacks as the great example. Now reinforcing the experience of the Phillies of 2022 in suggesting that just get in, right? Like about how precious the opportunity to contend can be because you guys got in as the 6th seed, then you make a run to the World Series, and you were talking about opening up a championship window, and so now all of a sudden it feels like this year the entire first of all in the offseason there were way more teams who considered themselves in it, I think, than had been the case in previous years, and secondly at this year's trade deadline again, ton of teams in it, and it felt like there was some influence on the kinds of players on how many teams were sellers. So there was kind of a scarcity of sells, but also how many teams maybe at the top end were there's this question of whether or not teams still wanted to build super teams because now they're well, wait a second, if the Diamondbacks can get in as a 6th seed and make the postseason, maybe we don't want to spend that much capital in order to up our chances of the division versus the wild card. So how do you feel about being the patron saint of contention for the entire industry as a 6th seed turned World Series team? And do you buy the premise that that dynamic has changed how the trade deadline unfolds?
I appreciate the way you view the world. It's ridiculous, but I appreciate how you view the world.
Not the first time you've called me that. So
that is a fact. That is a fact. I think it has changed dramatically. Yes. I think the landscape has changed dramatically with the 6th playoff spot. And it's exactly what baseball was hoping to create and has created. That's the way I look at it. Off season, last trade deadline, this trading deadline, the amount of buyers, the amount of teams in it, the amount of teams that are valuing playoff contention all the way through, I think it's exactly what the game needed and needs. And I think it's great. It makes our jobs harder because buying is with very few suitors is tricky. Prices go up dramatically. And so from my standpoint, that's not great, but it's great for the game, in my opinion. The number of teams that are in contention right now, I think is great for the game. I think that, the ability to get into the playoffs and should be paramount for as many teams as possible. And I think the number of teams that you could kind of think were being written off on opening day this year, I would say is probably one of the smaller numbers that we've had in a long time. And that's exactly the way the game should be run. And yeah, I know, I think like, Diamondbacks being in the World Series, everyone wants the big market club. We get all that. We know, TV and all the other stuff that happens, but I think it's great for the game that we have that opportunity to get in and to make a run. And we got hot. So, we played well, but when we got hot, but I also think, it makes, I think, some of the bigger teams take notice and not just, hey, the first round matchup, they're just going to bury us. You know what I mean? And because that didn't happen. And who knows what happens, this year. Maybe it's all the big market clubs that go to the end, but I think that's what's great about the game of baseball, frankly. And I think we're in a good spot in terms of where that competitive window is dynamic within the game, at least from the amount of teams that, even teams that were built in the offseason that didn't sell, that are still playing competitive baseball, that are still good teams. I think that's good for those fan bases. I think the young players that are coming up on those teams that are playing on more competitive teams, I think that's good for those young players long term. And I think it demonstrates a healthiness, in my opinion, for where the game is right now.
Along those lines, you guys earlier this season, about halfway through the season, you were 7 games under 500 at the end of May. You were 39-43 just past the halfway point. Was there any point that, was there any consideration then, or at least curiosity of shoot, are we going to end up in a sell mode for this deadline? Or based on what you had accomplished, were you this group is going to, this group A will figure it out, and B, we want to build off of what we had last year, and we're going to be reinforcing one way or the other?
Yeah, I mean, number 2 was clearly what we wanted to do. I think the only scenario in which if it had just gone down, if we had just spiraled down immediately from where we were, what you're talking about, where we were sitting, either going from 7 down to 15, or where we were 4 under, going up to the deadline, well under 500, chasing a bunch of teams. The intention was to buy the entire time. It's what we spent the whole offseason doing. We just didn't play well in the first half of the season, and we didn't play that poorly, but we were just mediocre. We lost a lot of our rotation for a period of time. We lost Perdomo for a long period of time. That hurt us a lot. And we've dealt with injuries, but everybody deals with injuries. So I don't know that was the root cause of it. We just didn't play great. And since we've kind of gotten guys back into the flow, we've played a little better here of late. We've been a little bit more consistently. We've swung the bats better. And, we got to get our pitching tightened up now, but we've played a lot better. And so, yes, my goal the entire time was to supplement. I want to buy at every deadline. I mean, when we went through 21, which was as miserable is, and even 22, when we brought up some of the kids in the second half and we were more exciting, and, there was sparks and signs of hope, and we weren't as brutal as we were in 2021. Selling at the deadline, kicking off 2 months of meaningless baseball in some ways is just not what I consider, anybody does really, what they want to have happen. And so, yeah, I think if we were within shouting distance, we were going to take the opportunity we could to add to the team. And fortunately, we were able to do that in a couple of different ways, and hopefully that will pay its dividends as we go through the second half.
Well, obviously, at least for the last 2 months it has, right? You said that you guys have been playing better, and, best record of baseball over a stretch of about the last 2 months. I do, it is interesting to me to think about that in the context of the different structure of the season, and or at least the different challenges of different points of the season. I think of August as being kind of a brutal separator month. Because it is 162 games, and and what that last third of the season looks like is oftentimes different than the middle third or the first third. To your mind, what goes into building a team that can excel in August and in the final 2 months of the season?
Yeah, I think the depth, right? We talk about it, you hear about it all the time. It is playing with good players for as many innings as you can play for an entire season. Right. It's not relying on guys that aren't ready, or, wherever they are in their development cycle. I think having guys being able to step in, every single team is injured. Every team, you look across every single contender, have a superstar that's been on the shelf for some period of time. They've had to figure out ways to win games when they haven't had their best or been at their best. And I think that's one of the big separators. And it's hard. It's hard to lose your superstar. Catello's on down now for hopefully a short period of time, but he's down, and we're going to have to figure out a way to win baseball games until he comes back and is sort of that top of the lineup catalyst that he's been all year, MVP contender. And finding a way, I think that's one of the greatest skills that Torrey has, is getting that group of players to not feel sorry for themselves because we've lost somebody or an injury. And that's probably the biggest redeeming quality in my mind of what this team represents to this point in the season, is that we've dealt with quite a few injuries and we've been able to pick up and just keep playing hard baseball every day. And it doesn't always translate into wins every night, but we stayed right where we need to stay through the darker periods, and then have gone on a run when we've gotten healthier, and hopefully we can do that again.
So I'll wrap up with this. Like, you're getting ready to come back to Fenway Park, where you made where you had an office for a long period of time. I think the only remaining Red Sox player who was around in the organization when you were here is Devers, right? Like, and he hadn't arrived in the big leagues when you departed in 2016. He was still just figuring things out, like concluding a pretty dominant season in Salem. But that's it. Is it weird to come back, to come to a Red Sox team that, like, where you don't have that kind of direct connection with someone who was on the major league team? How much does this still feel like a homecoming for you as you do come back for a few days in Fenway?
Yeah, it's funny with professional baseball. Like I have the greatest memories, but once you start working with another team and another group of players, like that sort of nostalgia goes away in a lot of ways. Anonymity is a beautiful thing. I would prefer it be this way, quite frankly. I'd prefer to just, sit in the dark in my hole and not have to. But it'll be great to see a lot of people. We have a lot of lifelong friends that are still some of my best friends that are not obviously in the dugout, but and I value and cherish that so much. And it's still one of the greatest cities on the planet, and being there in the fall. And as I told my son, like, I've never met anyone that has ever regretted going to college in Boston. And so my advice to him over the next 10 days, as I warm him up to move to that city, is you have 4 years to just enjoy the hell out of this place. And obviously he grew up in the suburbs, but I think this is going to be a whole new experience. And that's what I take from being there. And obviously working with the people that I work with that are now kind of around the game quite a bit. It just holds a very fond place for the passion for baseball, and we'll have our work cut out from it, because this is one of the better Sox teams that I've seen in a while, and they're strong and they're deep, and we'll see. Hopefully it's good baseball for 3 days and we come out on top. But I will, the nostalgia will end as soon as we have to pitch to Devers with runners in scoring position. Yes.
Save for maybe the move-in that you have with your son. But Mike, thanks so much for joining. It is fantastic to have you on the podcast. Thanks for. I will wish you well as you retreat into your darkness voluntarily. Maybe the lights will automatically shut off again in the middle as we send you off. But it's great to see you. Thanks for joining 310 to Left, and look forward to seeing you at Fenway this weekend.
All right, Alex. Thanks.